Perfect. Okay, let's see if that goes. There we go. Okay, so I am welcoming Dana Zaiser of Norton tonight, talking about money alternatives of the Civil War. Just a little brief intro and some info about Dana. Most people are unaware that there is was a terrible shortage of coins during the Civil War. This presentation will describe the alternatives that the public used while conducting business. Paper, scrip, stamps, and case stamps, federally issued fractional currency, and privately issued tokens will be discussed. And about Dana, he lives in Norton and is president of the Old Colony Civil War Roundtable of Dedham and has been published 5 times on this subject. So I will turn things over to Dana, but I will also ask everybody, please, if you would, mute yourself. And if you have any questions, certainly you can jump in by raising your hand or just asking your question or putting it in the chat, whatever works for you. So thank you, Dana.
All right, thank you. I can tell, usually I can see the chat, but I can't right now. So I might have done something wrong here on my end.
Not a problem. If I see a question, I can certainly serve it up to you.
Great, sounds good. All right, so yeah, money alternatives of the Civil War. My credentials, I'm a member of the American Numismatic Association. A numismatist is just somebody who studies coins. The member of the Civil War Token Society, Token and Metals, Collectors Club, etc. Does not mean that I'm an expert in this subject. It just means I pay a lot of money in dues. Basically, it's a subject that I'm just real passionate about. So hopefully that will come through. So why did they, so what was going on in the Civil War? Let's start off with what did the coins look like? They had an Indian head cent, and it was made out of a copper and nickel mixture. And they had a silver 3-cent piece, which is kind of unusual. Then they had a half dime, and it's made out of silver. If you told someone at that time you had a nickel in your pocket, they'd have no clue what you were talking about. It was called a half dime, and it was made of silver. Here's just an example of what a $50 would look like during that time period. Most of they had $50. This one's $1, but they had $50 that had the same design. And this one's 1859, so it could have been circulating at the time of the Civil War. So why did they need alternatives? Well, within a few months after the start of the Civil War, it said over $200 million in small change disappeared. Now, I don't know if that number is valid. It was published around 1880, 1890. Somebody put it in an article, and everybody since has used that number. But it just shows you, it's such a large number. It shows you what the impact was of this change, of shortage of change. There was a lot of fear. Anytime you have a war, it's uncertain who's going to win. And because of that, the price of silver increased. If you guys are old enough, from 1964, the price of silver went up so much that the quarters were worth like 30 cents, the $50 worth more. Everything was worth more than face value. So you had a problem with people hoarding them because there was money to be made. And even if this change, even if it just went from 5 cents to 6 cents back in the Civil War, that was a lot of money back then. So you have to keep that in perspective. How did they deal with the coin shortage? Some of them accepted postage stamps. Now, these were the old stamps, that you lick on the back, and let's say you were going into town, you put a bunch of them on a hot humid summer day, you put it in your pocket and you walk to town. What are those going to look like when you get there? They're all going to be stuck together. They have, someone came up with the idea of putting them in holders, encased postage stamps. Some merchants issued paper scrip, and just basically almost like IOUs. And the government, to help relieve the shortage of change, issued fractional currency, paper money. But the Civil War was not that far away, only maybe 80 years from the Revolution. And you probably remembered hearing your grandparents saying words like "not worth a continental." Do not believe in paper money issued by the government. So this wasn't well received. And last but not least is tokens. Here's a picture of an encased stamp. It's in a holder. You put whatever denomination stamp you want in this holder. They then put a thin piece of mica over it so that it would protect the stamp. And you could look through the mica and see what was behind it, what stamp was there. The back sometimes would have advertising on it, so to help defray the costs. But these were kind of expensive to do. So you probably didn't want to put a 10-cent stamp in a 5-cent holder. You know, you were in the hole pretty good by then. Here's some examples of paper scrip. You notice underneath the house there, it says, "This is not currency, but a memorandum for change." The last thing you wanted was the government knocking on your door, asking you why you're making money. You didn't want to be hauled in for counterfeiting. So they specifically put it that it's just a memorandum for change. This one wasn't actually issued because it's not signed on the bottom, but you can see the date, January of 1863 in Roxbury, Mass. The bottom one is one that's from down south. I like this one because it has a picture of a train on it. A lot of people like trains. This is some of the example of the fractional currency that I have in my collection, a 3-cent piece and a 10-cent piece of currency. Again, people did not like this because it was basically issued by the government, and the government is the one who got you into this big mess. So no one trusted the government. Nothing's changed. So another way of handling, and the more durable solution, was to use tokens, and this happens to be my specialty. Now remember, only the federal government can legally issue money. So why were these tokens accepted? They weren't legal. They were, they were illegal as heck, especially under the Acts of 1862. There was no real alternative, and the person probably trusted the merchant more than the government. The faraway government had, okay, what do fractional refer to? Yeah, so I see a question already came up. Fractional currency, a fraction of a dollar. That's why it was 10 cents and 3 cents. They also issued 50-cent ones too. So why would tokens accept it? You probably, the merchant that was giving it to you, you probably trusted them. You probably went to lodge with them. You probably went to church with them. Your kids probably played together. Maybe you went to school with them. And meanwhile, you have this government, the faraway government, that got you into this mess. So that's probably why people accepted them, even though they were illegal. Oops. Okay. Okay, there's 3 types of Civil War tokens. Patriotic tokens, these have patriotic sayings on them and pictures. Store card tokens, business names would be on them, and street addresses. So you used them as money, and you also had some free advertising thrown in. Sattler tokens, if I have time at the end, I'll do about 5 minutes on Sattler tokens. Right now, I'll just say that they're very rare, they're very expensive, and my wife won't let me collect them because they're very expensive. These were just used more by the military. Here's 2 examples of patriotic tokens. Miss Liberty is on the left. And on the right is something that almost looks like an Indian head penny. These designs were chosen because they wanted to make them more acceptable to people, the tokens. So what did they say on the back? Remember, only the government can issue money. So on the back, the one on the left says not 1 cent. Now, if you missed that word, you thought you had a penny, you didn't, or 1 cent. The other one says, "I owe you 1 cent." Again, you couldn't be charged with counterfeiting because you plainly say, "Oh no, it's just you could just say it was a novelty item." Other themes you'll see is Army, our Navy, Army and Navy, death to traitors, no compromise with traitors. There's kind of a neat one with Jefferson Davis on it, and you see him hanging from the gallows. Union forever, united country, and one country. The Monitor had 6 different designs on this, very popular. The Monitor was kind of the pride of that time period. You figure there's no paddle wheels on it. This had a propeller on it. It didn't have sails. It had a steam engine under it. It had a revolving turret, gun turret, all new, ironclad. Who put iron on the sides of ships? This was all new, and so this one is fairly popular. There's 6 different designs. You also, besides the Monitor, you might see Ben Franklin, George Washington, General Franz Sigel. Now, he had his token. General Grant, interesting enough, did not have a token, any Civil War token with his name on it. Franz Sigel did. Franz Sigel was not exactly the most competent general that the Union force had. They used him basically because he was recruiting Germans for the Union cause. But the only reason why he really has a token is his brother-in-law made the token. General George McClellan is on him, but I feel that those are kind of more presidential campaign tokens. Then you have flags, you'll have eagles, and sometimes Masonic symbols on them. And this is one of the ones for Lincoln. It's dated 1864. Again, my feeling is that it should be classified as a presidential campaign token, but people can argue with me on that. The tokens were, all of these tokens were the size of a penny, and they were usually traded as a penny. There are some that are bigger, and those would have probably been used for more money. There's a few more that I'll go into in just a minute.
Dana, the question asks, how much is a token worth?
Well, I assume at the time period is what they're talking about. Something like the one you're looking at, if you were to buy this now, would be maybe $150, $200. But at the time, they would have traded for a penny. And some of them are, and they're the size of a modern penny too. And why isn't this? Okay, there we go. This one I just threw in. It's a neat cannon. If you've ever been to a reenactment, when they fire off these things, boy, everything just shakes. You can only imagine what it was like to have 200 of them lined up. At Gettysburg, they had about 200 firing at the same time. Quite impressive. This one I just put on just for fun. Now, how much more patriotic can you get? The flag of our Union. It has this, there's a couple different versions of this too. Might be 12 of them. Some of them have different numbers of stars. Some of them, the die had to be engraved by hand. So sometimes the placement of the stars is different. So you can actually tell the difference between the different ones. So the flag of our Union, you turn it over, and what does it say? If anyone attempts to tear it down, shoot them on the spot. This is a quote by John Dix. You see the Dix in the middle there. He was Secretary of the Treasury under Buchanan. Sent this into a telegram to some Treasury agents that were down in New Orleans trying to collect tariffs, and he sent this, and it was immediately a copy of the telegram, of course, immediately gets delivered to the local newspaper, and they fired up everybody like, how dare they do this? They're going to come down here and shoot us. It caused a lot of embarrassment for the Buchanan administration. Now, I mentioned that these dies, you had to engrave them by hand. So I have 2 of these exact ones, right? Exact. But then you start looking at it, and you see the, let me just move hopefully you can see my cursor. You see the T and the F here, and you see how it's a little different over here. The S is under the A where it says shoot, under the A under attempt. If you look at the one on the right, it's under the T. So you can see minor variations in the positions of the letters. And there's about 17 different ones that say this. Now, of course, if you, that's just from little human error. but if you want to talk about a lot of human error, one of these says, if anyone attempts to tear it down, shoot him on the spoot, S-P-O-O-T. Now, you got to remember, if you want this raised up on the coin, you have to put it down into the die, and you have to do a mirror image of the of what you want on the coin. So you had to do everything backwards, basically, on the die. So it was kind of tough for them to do. This guy just got a little confused with the shoot and the spoot. Now, one thing, not just like today, not everyone was in favor of the war. So they have some that they're classified as patriotic tokens, but there's sort of a subclass of unpatriotic ones. And they say peace forever, live and let live. We'll review that in just a second. This one, horrors of war, the blessings of peace. They're showing the grieving widow up above in the cornucopia of plenty on the blessings of the peace. They were not in favor of the war. This one says millions for contractors, and then on the back, not 1 cent for the widows. So they really were taking aim at the people who were making money off of the war, and recognizing the people that were suffering. And this one, concession before secession. This is another one, unpatriotic token. Now this is the best one that I have, but it's very hard to find an example of this one in good condition. If they are shaking hands and on the cuff, one side says south and the other one says north, but it's very hard to see on this. It just, in fact, on most of the ones you have, it's not an expensive token, but if you can clearly read south and north on the cuff, the price goes through the roof. You might pay $150 for one. Now, somebody with much more patience than I did decided they would organize these patriotic tokens because of all the different designs. What they did is they had a number for the front or the obverse of the token and a number for the back or the reverse. Then they are also made in different types of metal. So you might see this 237 423A. The A would stand for copper, but you might see it in bronze. There are some that are made out of lead. Some of the store card tokens you'll see in nickel and silver, and there's even a few that are made out of rubber. If you're a coin person or coin collector, you probably wonder, how do you grade them? There's so many different designs and like over 24 manufacturers. It's very hard to come up with a formal grading system. What I do is I grade it similar to Indian head pennies. I'll look at it and judge the wear on the coin. Now, the problem with that is that some of them, I saw one token on eBay and the bidding went through the roof. It was like the finest known piece. And I wouldn't have allowed it in the house, never mind in my collection. It was probably worn dies, rusty dies, so the detail was terrible on it. So that's part of the problem you have with the different manufacturers. So basically, there's a lot of room for arguing on grading. Just kind of base it on the amount of wear on the token. All right, we're going to switch gears now to store card tokens. These have the names of the business and the addresses. So you can make change with it and you get some advertising on it. There's 8,500 different tokens issued by 1,500 merchants in about 400 cities and towns in 22 states. Most of those are northern states. They were issued by general stores, breweries, bakeries. I happen to collect more of my share of drugstore tokens because I am a retired pharmacist, gunsmiths, jewelers, numerous others, including this one. He sold cigars, which I thought was kind of interesting, cigars and tobacco. He was down in New York City. So as I said, you would have on the front, you would have the name and address of the business, but the reverse, what do you put on it? It's usually a leftover patriotic design. Maybe he had the die maker had a leftover Indian design. Maybe he had a Miss Liberty, maybe you had a flags. And, but if you had a booming business and you wanted to spend some money, you might have them engrave a custom design, which is related to their business. And I'll show you some of those. And some of them will say good for, and it could be whatever it's good for. It could be good for a pint of milk, a quart of milk, a loaf of bread, a mug of beer. They they would issue them that way. So I would assume when someone asked me how much were they, most of them went for a penny, would be traded as a penny. But these good for, it's probably whatever a quart of milk, however much a quart of milk or a loaf of bread was, would set the price on how much that token would trade for. But those are fairly rare. You did not want to be redeeming those all day and giving away stuff for free. You wanted to be selling the stuff, so you would get those out of circulation as soon as possible. This one's an example of a custom-made token design. The Good Samaritan is the name of the stove. But what I like about it as a historian, this shows how they lived back then. This one's a high grade one, so you can see they got pots and pans on top of the stove. The wood would go in the bottom. Probably to the right is where you would bake your bread. And you would have the different levers to allow the air in and out to adjust the flame. It just shows you how they lived back then, which I thought was pretty cool. George Ames, he was out in Illinois. He actually was a pharmacist, and you can tell he's got the mortar and pestle there. Mr. Kelly, easy enough to tell what he sold. Those are, it's got a nice example of a top hat. Excuse me. All right, now I used to say 6 of these tokens, Civil War tokens, were issued by women, but they found a 7th one just recently. So there's new discoveries coming on this every year. It's not, the book is not in the information's not in stone. Let's put it that way. Mrs. Reed owned a store. All right. Now, how many women owned stores during that time period? You know, not many. Even less issued Civil War tokens. And as far as we know, only 7. The last one that was just found only had a first initial, and everyone was looking for Edward or Elliot or something like that. Found out that the first name was Elizabeth. So that changed everything. Another thing, this one on the left shows you how they would live. That some people probably have one of these, or you've seen one on the front porch of somebody's house. It's just a milk carton, a milk bottle. And on the back, he advertises that he is selling dairy equipment. And the other one on the right, good for 1 glass of soda. This is one of those ones where would trade for whatever, how much a glass of soda was worth at that time. Maybe it was 2 cents, I'm not sure. But it was also the size of about about the size of a quarter. The one on the left is the size of a modern penny. Now this guy, Harrington, he sold sewing machines. So what I always do is I ask how much was a sewing machine back in the Civil War period. And if you guessed $25, you were right. Now, so if they're selling for 25 or more, why is he selling $15 ones? And they were wondering whether some of the sewing machines may have, shall we say, fell off the back of a horse-drawn wagon. Did they accidentally get lost and he found them? I don't know. But back in the Civil War, there were about 4 major companies that were making sewing machines, and they were all suing the heck out of each other. And then they finally came to an agreement that they would collect a royalty, and it varied through the years. So we'll call it $10 from this example. So everyone would pay $25. $10 would go into this fund, and it would be split between the manufacturers, and they agreed not to sue each other anymore. Illegal as heck nowadays. You will see examples. the person who researched this, he said that you'll see in newspapers in Detroit, Harrington's ad for a $15 sewing machine. Next to it, you'll see an ad for a $25 sewing machine. But that one in bold letters will say, "Our machines are properly licensed." So they were ganging up on this guy. Eventually, he increased his price to $25, but he didn't have really much of a choice. But how much, figure this way, if you could get together the $15 and could buy a sewing machine, that would have a tremendous impact on the family. You now did not have to buy clothes. You could make them. You could make clothes for your neighbors and sell them. You could, so you'd have extra money coming in. It would just something as simple as buying a sewing machine would increase the family's fortunes quite significantly. Mr. Bond, he was a druggist. If you're wondering what he did in his off time, if you wanted to take a wild stab in the dark, what he did, he would probably go to Masonic Lodge. There is the Masonic symbol on his token. Again, it's a penny size, modern penny size. And it would also, if somebody was a Mason and they came to Indiana and they saw that, they got that in change, they would say, "Oh, this is where I should do my business." So it helped advertising for him. This one, unfortunately, was popular during the Civil War. Notice on the left, that little box is a coffin. This is for an undertaker. There were two different ones that were issued by undertakers during the war. Both of them are very desirable because of the morbid subject. They probably sell for a higher price than they should. They are the size of a modern quarter. No indication on there on price, how much it was used for. Since it was bigger than the ones that I had mentioned that are the size of a modern penny, maybe this one traded for 2 cents. And this one was interesting. Someone did research on this. In fact, a lot of people did research. They went to the New York archives, nothing. They went to the historical center. They checked newspapers, because you had to check all the newspapers to see, was there an ad with something that said that the city of New York issued these 1 cent tokens? Nothing. They worked for a long time. All of a sudden, some guy found a ship that went from New London to New York City every day. It was the old famous milk run, and it was called the City of New York. They would also take along passengers. The passengers would have a snack bar there. They would probably get this in change when they would buy something to drink or something to eat on their voyage to New York City. This one's the only one with Hebrew on it. Underneath where it says Felix, those symbols there are it's Hebrew for kosher. So it's Felix's Kosher Dining Saloon. This one is one that I own. It's not in the best condition, but I would call it affordable condition. If you get them in, they can go up as high as $700 or $800 if you get them in perfect condition. I like this guy, Philip Best. He had a custom-made token for both sides of his token. And obviously, he brewed beer. You have a mug of beer. He's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Very high German population there. Well, yeah, it's to sell. If you want to sell beer, do it to the Germans, right? So they love their beer. And I'm German, by the way. So Empire Brewery, on the front, he's got the mug of beer. On the back, he's got the tools of the trade. He's got some hops growing there. He's got the beer barrel. So it's kind of a cool looking token. No one's ever heard of Empire Brewery anymore. It is a neat picture token because you got the two pictures on it. But probably the biggest, besides issuing a Civil War token, his daughter married a Civil War veteran. I believe he was a lieutenant. And nowadays, no one's ever heard of this guy Pabst, but that's who she married. So the brewer's daughter ended up marrying this gentleman, and I don't know whatever happened to him. Some of you may, I have a feeling some of you know him. This one's a neat picture token. I sold one to my dentist because it has false teeth on it. It's just a cool token. Anytime you get something like that, it has a good story behind it. People love it. I gave a talk. Usually I don't have this in my talk. I trade out depending on who I'm talking to, but I was doing a talk to a Rhode Island group. So this is a Rhode Island token, and it has General Burnside on it. Now, notice General Burnside. The one thing that stands out is his sideburns. In fact, that's where the word sideburns comes from, is they named him after General Burnside of the Civil War. I don't know what they called him before that, facial hair maybe, but after General Burnside got through, because they were so pronounced, if you ever see a picture of him, you can actually pick him out of a crowd because he's got these huge bushy sideburns. It's a Massachusetts token. On the left is Bunker Hill Monument, and the only one that was issued in Charlestown. But the other one, again, you don't want to be charged with counterfeiting. It says good for a cent, SCENT, and with a dog on it. So you have the you have plausible deniability, I guess is what the politicians would call it. You could say, no, Your Honor, this wasn't a cent, a penny. This is just a novelty item, but they would have used it as a penny back then. Yeah, but just a way of circumventing the court system. This one, Hussey's Special Messenger Post. Back in the Civil War, the mail was delivered to the local post office, and you had to walk and get it, or ride and get it, go into town, pick up your mail. It was not delivered to your house. Mr. Hussey came up with this idea that he would deliver it to the people that needed to get it. There were people like stockbrokers needed to trade immediately, needed to get the documents there. Bankers needed to get the money and deposits. They couldn't wait a couple of days or anything. They needed the money or the transactions recorded. You had lawyers, anything like that needed to be anything that needed to be delivered right away. This Hussey, he has two of them. This one with like a train on it, and another one with a person riding a galloping horse. He was the only person to issue Civil War tokens who also issued a postage stamp, which was kind of unique on his part. This particular token is probably that you're looking at is probably the finest known token. None have been graded higher. I bought that years ago. Didn't know. I just knew it was high grade. Sent it off to be certified, officially graded by a company, and came up 2 points higher than anybody else. So how do you figure out what you have, what token? This one is organized. George Fold came up, again, much more patience than I have. He came up, you got to have the reference book for either the Patriotic Tokens or the store cards. This one is a Thomas Brimelow. He's a druggist. And the first two letters, New York City, New York, I should say. 630 is stands for the city, which is New York City. K is the person, which would be Thomas Brimelow, his company. He issued 9 tokens. So you will have, this is token number 1, and A would be copper. So you can tell exactly what you have by this. You'll see ads for these occasionally, and it might just have these numbers, and you have to look it up to know what you're ordering. So I've told you some stories behind the tokens, and I always said, when I retire, I'm going to research a couple of these, but not until I retire. So about, I don't know, about 18 years ago, I'm minding my own business in the store, and some guy comes in and his last name's Brain. I said, you know, Mr. Brain, I have a token with your name on it. And he stops right in his tracks and he goes, one of my uncles, great uncles, issued Civil War tokens. So I didn't want to bother him at supper time. You'd think it was a telemarketer. So I mailed him a letter and said, this is the guy. There's a guy on the web, reputable dealer. He has a brain token for sale if you're interested in it. Well, next thing you know, I get an email from him, and he says to me, I just bought it. It just arrived today. He said, it's beautiful. You know, he loved it. So he bought a part of his family history. He bought part of the Civil War history, and it set him back $28 at the time. You know, it was that included postage. That, like I said, that was about 18 years ago. And but he gave me access to an unpublished manuscript that his grandfather wrote on the Brain family. And so I did a lot of research. Springfield, Ohio is where they were from. Back when Jefferson bought the Louisiana Purchase, he figured that to get settlers out there, he wanted a decent road. So he started building what's called the National Road. And that went along fine. And it got to about Springfield. And by that time, Andrew Jackson was in power, and he immediately cut off all funding. So the road kind of ended there. People would get there. They'd probably settle there for a few days before they continued on. And they would, or they might decide, no, Springfield's nice, I'll settle here. But because of that, Springfield almost became a boom town since everybody was going through town. They would stop for resupplies, and everybody seemed to be making money. Springfield started growing by leaps and bounds. Mr. Brain, right after the Civil War, ended up closing down his drugstore, and he went down south. Now, the family suspects he was one of those carpetbaggers that you read about. You know, they don't, they kind of brag about it. Yeah, he was a carpetbagger, you know, so he went down, I believe it was to Missouri, and he had a sawmill down there. Eventually, by 1868, he was back in Springfield, and he started a lumberyard. And I happened to ask the person that was giving me the information on the Brain family. I said, well, when did this lumberyard go out of business? And he said, oh God, I hope it hasn't gone out of business. I just got a dividend check. So up until it went from 1868 up until 2009 when we had the financial problems. At that point, it got bought out by another company. But up until it had a good run. Their motto was lumberman since 1868. So while I was researching this one, I kept coming across the name Ludlow. Then I come across the name Bushnell. Then I come across John Ludlow and Zaiser of Bushnell. And I said, I wonder if either one of them issued a token, since I'm finding all this information. So I looked it up. Oh, sorry, got ahead of myself. Here's a picture of the Brain lumberyard. This was taken about 1930-ish, I'd guess. You can see that the railroad went right in there with bringing lumber in, taking lumber out. He had quite a business. He made a lot of money at this. So getting back to Ludlow and Bushnell, would you believe I found a partnership? Ludlow and Bushnell, they were druggists, and they were in Springfield, of course. And John Ludlow started the store. He learned it. Said he learned the business in Cincinnati, and then Bushnell ends up showing up in Springfield, and he worked for a farming equipment manufacturer, and it was known by like 4 different names. Like if you remember back in the 60s or 70s when they had Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner and Smith was the full name of the trading stock company, and now it's just called like Merrill Lynch. But yeah, they had 4 different names of the owners of this farm equipment company, and he worked there. But then he started working for Ludlow. And why did Ludlow take a partner? Ludlow was actually president of the bank. I can't see him having financial problems, he did take Bushnell on as a partner. The usual reason that he took Bushnell on, Bushnell married Ludlow's daughter, so he really didn't have a choice. He had to take Bushnell on. Bushnell, though, was a bright guy. He was a sharp guy. And they, like I said, Ludlow was president of the First Bank of Springfield. They had an opening on the board of directors. They did a nationwide search, and after a while, they finally decided on Ludlow's son-in-law, Bushnell. He's on the board of directors. Ludlow retires as president. They did another nationwide search to come up with the president. Who gets it? Bushnell. He's now president. He's got access to money. So, and Springfield, as I had mentioned earlier, was kind of a boom town. He ended up putting in the trolley system, and then he started the gas, natural gas system for street lights and houses. So this guy made himself a fortune. He eventually ended up at the place that he started out with. He was a bookkeeper at that farm equipment company. And he finally went back afterwards, but now he's part of the owner. He's part owner of this farm equipment company. So this farm equipment company was known by numerous names. As one partner would die off, another name would go on. And nowadays, though, I'm sure nobody's ever heard of International Harvester or Navistar. They are the number one employer still in Springfield, Ohio. And this was one of the owners. Bushnell was one of the owners. Gives you an idea how much money this guy had. He ran for Congress, got his name out there. You know, everyone knew who he was, but he didn't win. So then a couple years later, they said, hey, we want you to run for governor of the state of Ohio. And he said, I'd love to. He said, but my friend Bill is running. And his friend Bill, he would not, he supported his friend Bill. He said, I'll support him, I'll help him as much as possible. He got his friend Bill elected governor. And then a couple years later, his friend Bill was up for re-election. And they said to Bushnell, okay, we know you won't run against him. We want you to be lieutenant governor. And he said, wow, I can't think of a more loser position than being lieutenant governor. He said he's used to being in charge. He had all these businesses that he'd run. You know, why would he want to be lieutenant governor? So he helped his friend Bill get elected governor. And then his friend Bill didn't want to be governor anymore. And once that happened, Bushnell saw his chance. And Bushnell ran to become governor of for governor, and he won. And he was as far as we know, he's the only person who issued Civil War tokens who went on to become the governor of a state. And there were some that became mayors, but this guy actually became the governor of a state. And I was the first one to discover that. I wrote it up and published it. So don't worry about his friend Bill. His friend Bill did get a new job. A guy by the name of William McKinley. He was able to get himself a new job. Unfortunately, he probably should have stayed in Springfield. We all know what happened to President McKinley. But you know, it's amazing. You can take these tokens and you find just the name and an address and all, and you start researching it using different techniques. It's amazing what you can find out. Dana, how am I running on time? Can I do Sattler tokens real fast?
Sure, we're not sticklers for time. I don't think anybody would want you to go till 10 o'clock, but certainly.
Oh, I can do
going.
to 11 if I had to. But
I think we're
Sattler
fine.
tokens.
Thanks
All right,
for
Sattler.
asking.
Yeah, I forgot to bring my, I was going to bring a clock up here in the office. Sattler tokens, these were used by the military. A sattler was assigned to a specific unit. He'd have a wagon full of goods. Think of him as a modern PX, but it was for profit. And what he would do, load up the wagon with things like pens and ink and paper, combs, and anything that maybe some fresh fruit, anything that the government was not supplying to the soldiers, he would supply at a greatly inflated price. And but they also issued tokens. And this one here was actually dug out of the ground. You can tell how corroded it is. The Sattler was part of assigned to the 41st Regiment, Ohio Volunteer Militia. The reason why it was dug out of the ground is this Sattler had the misfortune of positioning his wagon in the wrong spot, and it got hit by a cannonball and blew up, burned. And this token was dug up many years after the fact. The 41st Regiment, if you look at this, it's just dying to be researched. The 41st Regiment, when you research it, you find out that this was a crack unit. These guys really knew their stuff. Let me just reach for something here. Okay, yeah, they really, there were actually 3 people, 2 or 3 people in this that actually won medal, or were awarded the Medal of Honor. They suffered severe casualties over the 4 years, 300 of their men out of 950, but they were held up as an example of good soldiering, because I have here 2 members were awarded the Medal of Honor. So if you were in a pitched battle for your life, this is the crew you wanted to, this is the unit you wanted backing you up.
Looking at that picture, Dana,
Yep.
if you go back, the 2 lines next to the 5 we saw on a previous coin, I'm not quite sure what that is. Is it just a design, or?
I think it's kind of a design, but also kept you from putting a 0 at the end to make it 50
okay,
cents. It also
makes
kept
sense.
you from putting a 1 on it.
Got it.
Those would be, but yeah, I assume it probably a little bit of both.
Thank you.
Here's one from these guys were, this is the 34th Ohio Vermont Militia. They were Zouaves. They were quite full of themselves. They would wear these colorful uniforms. At the beginning of the war, they would have these beautiful, colorful, handmade outfits, gaudy red and everything. But towards the end of the war, when those ended up wearing out, the Army would just give them regular standard issue. These are made of copper, very thin. You'll find that most of the Sattler ones are very thin. And I think it was because they didn't want to use that much metal to get them cheap. These guys were like, they really kind of took advantage of the soldiers, because the soldiers had to buy from the Sattler. They were, this guy was assigned, this particular one was assigned to the 34th, and the 34th could only buy from them. Now, just to know what the 34th, if you were involved in a pitched battle for your life, the 34th is the one you wanted guarding a bridge in Kalamazoo, Michigan, somewhere. You did not want them anywhere close to you. In a letter, a guy by the name of Charles Tenney wrote, he offered his opinion of the regiment. Quote, "The poorest apologies for soldiers I ever saw. On drill, their movements are perfectly comical. And as to their principle, there is no gentleman among them." End of quote. Well, no gentleman among them. That was quite a slam at the for the 1800s. There is an example of a similar opinion issued by a gentleman in his diary, a gentleman by the name of Rutherford B. Hayes, thought about the same of the 34th. The 34th in January of 1865 was caught sleeping, literally. They didn't expect in the middle of winter with a heavy snowfall that the Confederates would attack. They ended up catching the sentries. They caught the pickets, all sleeping, went right into the thing. They caught most of the unit sleeping and captured a lot of them. All the officers ended up being court-martialed. It was pretty bad. These guys were really, really bad. All right, so this one's the volunteer militia. This next one is a cavalry, just to show that there were other units that also used Sattlers, and wasn't just assigned to infantry. This guy was a battery, basically an artillery unit that would have used that. And this one, Longwell. I should replace this. A friend of mine let me borrow his token to take picture. He's a major dealer, and I owe him a favor because he let me use this one. I've since actually bought one of these. It's the one I had it certified. It's one of 4 known pieces that I have, and it's assigned to the 119th Regiment, USCI. I always ask people, what is USCI? And get a lot of blank looks. They can usually guess United States. I is infantry. They may guess Confederate for the C, but that United States and Confederacy would not be used in the same sentence. If you're politically incorrect, you would have guessed it stands for colored. This is the United States Colored Infantry. I love this token because because of the history behind it. These guys knew what would happen if there was a battle and they were captured. Their lives were pretty much over if or would be a living hell if they survived it. And yet they volunteered freely and endured a lot of indignities from the white units, but they put up with it. And I just really like the history behind this. This one, this unit joined in January of 1865. They didn't see as much action as some of the others. They just saw a few skirmishes here and there, and they did some guard duty, but they weren't as in the middle of the fight as some of the other units. But there's only a few tokens that were issued by sutlers of so-called colored units. That was their official name, or you might see colored troops. I'm not trying to be racist or anything when I use that term. So let's see, what else do I have? All right, so hopefully you can see that these are really fun to collect, but they're hard to find. I'll go to a coin show, there'll be 200 dealers there, 150 dealers, and I'll be lucky I find 2 or 3 that even have a couple Civil War tokens, and most of them I already have now because I get about 350 of them. Only about 75% of these are well documented. They're finding new ones all the time. They're really cool. If you see one that you like and it's got an interesting theme to it, say whether it be a bakery or something like that, research it. Use genealogy techniques, city directories, history books, federal census, the web. You can get some of these history books at I got the one from Springfield, Ohio, from the Mormon. Mormons had it on microfilm, so I was able to look through it. Yeah, they're a lot of fun. They're still finding stuff. One guy read a newspaper, came across it in Detroit, Michigan, had a collection of Civil War tokens donated to them back in 1912. And we don't think anyone ever looked at it since. And this guy went up, and the librarian was very nervous about letting him look at this valuable collection. And, but she also had to sit there with him, so she would only sit there for an hour. But within one hour, he found 3 unknown tokens. So he was able to do some groundbreaking research on that. Still, they're finding new stuff all the time. Now, at the end of the Civil War era, these, I mentioned to you, the tokens were illegal under the Acts of 1862, which everyone ignored. A lawyer actually did some research, and he found one person prosecuted under by the federal government in New York City. But that was the only one he could find. In April of 1864, the government had to crack down on merchants issuing tokens. Some of the merchants weren't honorable. They would issue the tokens, but then they wouldn't take them back in change. So that created quite a problem. At the beginning, it wasn't so bad, but then as more and more tokens came out, the merchants started to balk at taking them back. So what the government did, besides just making it illegal and increasing the penalties for issuing these tokens, they changed the Indian head cent to an all copper. The one that I showed you at the beginning was a copper and nickel mixture. Then they also issued a copper 2-cent piece. They changed the 3-cent piece from silver to nickel. So now they had a nickel 3-cent piece. And the silver half dime that I showed you at the beginning, it's now a nickel coin, and it was now the size and the shape, the size of the nickels that we have now. Different design, but quite similar. So once they took all the silver out of that, they could start, the small change started to circulate. Plus, by 1864, people could almost see the end of the war. And things were starting to go in favor of the Union. So they they weren't as nervous and about hoarding the coins for the value, for the silver value. So I guess that's about it. If there's any questions, and there's also a website there, if you want to copy that down, that's for the Civil War Token Society. There's a lot of information there. You can also buy the reference books there at a discount, and it's a pretty good organization. They have a pretty good journal that comes out 4 times a year. It used to be exclusively on Civil War tokens, but now they did it on Civil War numismatics. So anything related to the Civil War is fair game now. So, and that's about it, Dana. Appreciate you having me. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Dana. This was terrific. I've got a question. So it's a little confusing to me. So if you can clarify, if I was around in the Civil War and I said, I want to do the Dana Mastriani coin, I go and I commission somebody to go and make the coins for me. Is that what it is?
Yeah, there were a couple of places in, now that I'm in the hitting 70, starting to get close to 70, my mind's going blank, but there was Scoville, I think it was, there was a company down in Connecticut that would make buttons for Civil War uniforms, stamp them out of brass, and then they just change the dies and stamp out tokens. There was another big one out in Ohio. You would give them an order, tell them what you wanted. The beauty of them is they only cost about 3/4 cent to make. So if you used them as a penny, you were ahead of the game already. But I mentioned the encased stamps. It cost a couple, maybe 5 cents to buy the holder. So now you're already in the hole. So the tokens were much more economical to use. But yeah, we could make it, and as long as our friends and neighbors in town trusted us, they would probably use it. They'd probably accept it.
Thank you for that. Other people with questions?
Yeah, Dana, I have a question.
Sure.
I don't understand why somebody would go to the expense of having tokens stamped, printed for them. How did they make any money off of this? What was the benefit to them?
Oh, they didn't have anything else. So, and if you went from let's say you go down the street and you go to the hardware store, and then you go to the meat market, and if each place you lost 2 or 3 cents, you'd be in trouble. So what they did is the merchants would make these up, cost them 3/4 cent, and they would maybe give the person two of them in the place of 2 cents. And hopefully when they went to the next market would take them. That was part of the problem. But at the beginning, the honor system seemed to work. Towards the end of the 1864, things got a little iffy then. But yeah, you had nothing else. They used barter, and if you were lucky, they would. If you had paper and you had a printer in town, you might have some paper scrip. But paper scrip rips. You couldn't. The stamps really stick together because they were the old-fashioned stamps that you had to lick. If you had them in your pocket and you walked to town and you started sweating on a nice, hot, humid day, they might all stick together. It was, it was basically there was nothing else to use, so they came up with this way of using it. Now, they did use tokens earlier. They had hard time tokens back in the 1830s during one of the financial panics. There is a history of using tokens in the past, so they weren't totally unfamiliar with the concept.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer it, or hopefully?
Yeah, I think so.
I can expand.
I have another question though.
Yeah.
What was going on in terms of the Confederacy and their coins?
If they had metal, they would have tried to make it into a bullet or a sword or something like that. They did not have the resources the North had. There are a few tokens. They're very rare, but you will find some. There's one from New Orleans. I do have an example of that in my collection. But what I don't have is West Virginia, Kentucky. They did issue some. Those were more the border states, so they had more access to metal and to the presses. The Confederate had the mint down in New Orleans, so they had the ability to stamp out stuff. They just didn't have the metal. They didn't have the silver. They could have made their own coins if they had the metal, but they had very short runs on it. They're very rare to find Confederate coins. But and even the paper was in short supply. A friend of mine was showing me an example of a newspaper from Vicksburg when they were under siege, and it says on one side, the paper says, "We will never surrender," and then at the bottom of it, it says, "What a difference a day makes." And the Yankees put in that they had captured the city. But when you look at it, when you turn it over, it's wallpaper that they used. They didn't have, he had run out of paper, so they were actually using wallpaper to put out a newspaper. Things down south are pretty bad. That even like at Christmas time, how do you get your kids gifts during the blockade? And one general told his kids that the Yankees wouldn't let Santa through. And another one was nice enough to tell his kids that the Yankees had shot Santa. So yeah, the times were tough down south with the blockade and everything. They had trouble making coins and trouble even printing paper.
Thank you.
Listen, I'd like to.
Yeah, I was going to say, I noticed some of the coins had seemingly like a rim that almost looked like it might be sitting in a piece of leather or something.
Some of them might be in holders that I put, coin holders.
Got it. Okay.
No, it's nothing. Just whatever I had put it on to take the picture of it, and
Got it. Okay.
the holders are clear.
Yeah.
And if it's the size of a penny and I use a nickel holder, it's you have quite an edge to it. But yeah, the tokens are very hard to find. If you do find them, you're lucky, and if you find them at a good price, even better. You'll find if you have time and you got nothing to do, just go on eBay. You don't have to have an account. Just go on eBay and type in Civil War tokens, and you'll find thousands of them. If you put it in and say, well, he said Sattler tokens were rare, so you put in Sattler tokens, you might be lucky to find 30 of them listed for sale. And if you do, if you check it like say you checked it once a week, you would probably find the more common ones being offered for sale. If you see a rare one, it's like, oh, I've never seen that. By the time you say that to yourself and you look, it's probably like $600 or $800. The bidding's probably been up that far. If you can get some real rare ones. There was one that I saw that was actually bent and had a hole in it. If you're a coin collector, you know that's death. Nobody wants it. This one went for over $1,000. It was like the only one known. It was. I was in shock. So it's. But most of them, the beauty of it is, the reason why I started collecting these tokens is I was collecting coins and I needed like a 1909 SVDB for $1,500. I needed a 55 double die, another $1,500. Or I could get a Civil War token. The most common Civil War token is rarer than the rarest Lincoln penny. So I could get something that was even rarer. And I mean, when I started collecting them, I was paying $2.50. Then it got expensive and they'd be 10. Now a decent one, a common decent one might be $25. I just sold one on eBay for 25 and another one for 35. But super rare. If 150 dealers, you might find only 2 or 3 that have Civil War tokens in their inventory. Great gifts for a collector that a collector and you're wondering what to get them for Christmas. or $35, you can get them something that's very rare. Now,
Certainly, this was an incredible talk. I certainly knew nothing about this. I don't know if anybody else did. But does anybody else have any questions, etc.?
I
No,
would like to invite people, the Old Colony Civil War Roundtable. We meet once a month. We're having a big dinner this month. But in November, we're having Chuck Viet. And when we have the meeting at the Endicott Estate in Dedham, too far for you guys to travel, but we put it out on Zoom. Follow us on Facebook. Is Olde is OLDE, the old spelling. Old Colony Civil War Roundtable. You will find us on Facebook, and the Zoom link will be there. It's usually the third Thursday of the month. We're having a Massachusetts court judge come talk to us in January, publisher of a leading Civil War magazine in February. We have some incredible, we have people from the History Channel. We have people from noted authors, historians, college professors. It is the Civil War Roundtable is an undiscovered gem. If you have a chance and you're into the Civil War, every month it's a different subject. I found out that there are actually 200 Civil War roundtables outside the United States. It's amazing. The Civil War is still a big topic 150 years after the war. So if anybody wants to join us, feel free.
it's still a pretty big topic in current times too.
Oh, yeah. One of my friends was doing research down there on a book, and he wanted to know where, Smith Factory was. And so he stops at the Smith Garage in Smithville, and the guy looks at him and goes, "You'll never find that." So he says, "I got a minute. Let me, I'll finish up this truck later that he was working on." He says, "I can jump in my truck." So they jumped in his truck, and he takes them down this dirt road out into the middle of nowhere. And all that's left of the factory is a chimney, a stone chimney. And so he gets him out there, and he says, "Mark, what do you want with this?" And he said, "Oh," he said, "back during the Civil War," he said, "my grandfather was part of the unit that burned this factory." And the guy said, "Really?" He says, "My great grandfather owned the factory." And he's like, uh-oh. Yeah, he was didn't know how that would end up, but he found it interesting that the two of them had a long conversation on the families and the impact of the war on their families and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of great stories related to the Civil War, good and bad. I mentioned the black units. There's one unit that they captured a bunch of them, and they put their guns down, put their hands up, and the Confederates said, "Okay, start running." And so you know how that ended up. Once they started to run, shot while trying to escape. So yeah, there's good and bad in the war. Dana, did you hear from my friend Mary? Or Gary?
No, I don't see anybody else here. There was an Elizabeth that was on here. And I
Okay,
did
no,
not I did not reach out to her yet. But
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
I will be doing that. So
She's a fantastic lady. She gives a great talk on Andersonville. And some of the stuff that she found, she was talking to somebody, and the person said, "Well, I've got a bunch of letters in a drawer that's been in our family for years. They should have been thrown out years ago." And so she came up with these letters home from a guy who was captured and held at and ended up dying at Andersonville prison during the Civil War. And then she found someone else had a journal, his journal, the same guy, and they collaborated and ended up putting them both into the Massachusetts Historical Society, because the letters in the journal should be, they both were historians and felt they should be together. But amazing what you can still find and how much stuff is out there.
This has been a terrific, certainly informative and enlightening, and just nothing I knew about. And so this was terrific to have you here tonight. So,
Well, thank you.
And
any
thank
other
you, Dana.
questions for Dana?
No? All right.
Seeing
No.
none, I will say thank you so much, and I appreciate everybody else joining tonight, and I wish everybody a nice rest of their evening. Thanks again, Dana.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Everybody for
Take care.
coming.